Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 1. We are going to presentation Chapter 1, Language in Society or Society in Language. The purpose of this chapter is to explain why the notion of language and dialect are fundamentally social and not linguistic constructs. This chapter also introduces other concepts such as communicative competence and say why these two are primary concerns of sociolinguistics because they depend on society in crucial ways. Language dialect. Dialect is a variation of group of speakers which are relative numbers in a certain area. In other words, dialect is the variety of ways of pronouncing or using styles of language. Dialects of language tend to differ more from one another geographically the more remote they are from one another geographically. In this respect, the study of dialects or dialectology has to do with boundaries, which often coincide with geographical features such as rivers and mountains.
Okay, language and dialect in Papua New Guinea. A preliminary example from northwestern New Britain in the Pacific region would be illustrated the problem of applying purely linguistic criteria in deciding what counts as a language or dialect. Linguistics generally recognize the two main language families in Papua New Guinea consist of 700 and 800 languages, Austronesian and non-Australian. The Annam language spoken in northwestern New Britain is a member of non-Austronesian and lexically unrelated to other languages, unknown in Papua New Guinea as far as we know at this point. However, in Papua New Guinea there is no one-on-one mapping name of village, group and language name. Sometimes up to 4 local names applies to what district officials decide to call the village one, and some names are common for 3 or 4 sites. The equivalent for this at the level of linguistic form is the presence of words widely used in the region for intergroup communication which is not accepted by anyone as part of the real vocabulary of their language. Guinea is fraught with difficulties because of the problems inherent in definition terms such as language and dialect.
Language and dialect in Europe. Romance and Germanic dialect continue. Europe can be taken to illustrate the arbitrariness of linguistic criteria and the importance of social factors in deciding what counts as a language or dialect. Some classic cases are the West Romance and Germanic dialect continua. The West Romance dialect continuum stretches through rural communities from the Atlantic coast of France through Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Mutual intelligibility exists between adjacent villages, although speakers of the standard varieties of French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese find one another mutually unintelligible to varying degrees. Lexico-statistical relationships. Degree of mutual intelligibility is greatly affected by the extent of social and other contact between the groups concerned as well as their attitudes to one another, and thus not necessarily have much to do with lexico-statistical relationships. In Scandinavia, for instance, if a traveler knows Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian, it is possible to communicate across language boundaries. Asymmetries emerge. In studies of mutual intelligibility, some interesting asymmetries emerge. Danes claim to understand Norwegian much better than Norwegians claim to understand Danes. The purest understanding is between Danes and Swedes, and the best between Norwegians and Swedes. However, Norwegians and Danes claim to understand Swedes better than Swedes claim to understand either Norwegians or Danes. It means that studies of mutual intelligibility are not really about linguistic relationships between varieties, but about social relationships, since it is people and not the varieties who understand or do not understand one another. autonomous and heteronymous. Some linguists have found the term autonomous and heteronymous speech varieties useful as alternative labels to language and dialect. Thus, we can say, for instance, that the Dutch dialect are dependent on or heteronymous with respect to Standard Dutch, German dialect to Standard German, and etc. This means that because speakers of German watch German TV, are taught Standard German in school, read in Standard German, and etc., they look to Standard German as a reference point. The term language is employed for a variety that is autonomous, together with all those varieties that are heteronymous upon it, because heteronomy and autonomy reflect political and cultural rather than purely linguistic factors. They can change.
So I'll read the first point, and the first point is American English as dialect of English or separate language depends on the point of view. Just Bernard Shaw characterized England and America as two nations divided by a common language. When Hal Mencken decided to call his book the American language rather than the English language in America, he was making a political statement. Similar sentiments had been expressed early by Noah Webster when he authored his Dictionary of American English and consciously employed spellings for center words. So, the second point is President Reagan very generously conceded that Shakespeare belongs as much to America as to the British in characterizing the special relationship. So President Reagan very generously conceded that Shakespeare belongs as much to America as to the British in characterizing the special relationship that exists between the United States and Britain. Speaking to an American interview, he observed that Magna Carta belongs as much as it does to us. So the third point is assert the autonomy of Australian English in the same way that Mencken is trying to do. So American linguistic declaration of independence was unparalleled in Australia until the appearance of Sidney Becker's book, The Australian Language, whose title confidently asserts the autonomy of Australian English in the same way that Mencken had attempted to do for American English. Australia, not from the viewpoint of England and of the judgments she passed upon our language because she didn't know it as well as we do. So the last point is opinion of several linguists regarding Australian speech and accents. So while some linguists declared there was nothing wrong with Australian speech, they still compare Australian accents with educated Southern British English ones. For some, there was an pleasant reminder of the extent to which Australian English differed from what was seen as a pretended standard. Thank you.
Accent, dialect. Some linguists make a further distinction between accent and dialect. An accent consists of a way of pronouncing variety. A dialect, however, varies from other dialects of the same language simultaneously on at least three levels of organization: pronunciation, grammar or syntax, and vocabulary. RP is the speech variety used by those educated at public school and is not tied to any particular locality. RP is sometimes considered to equivalent of a standard English pronunciation, particularly in England. It is sometimes also referred to as BBC English, Oxford English, and the King's English, and is the accent taught to foreigners who are learning British rather than American English.
Style can be defined as variants of difference in language forms that are used for the same purpose based on certain situations. Variations in language are caused by the existence of social interaction activities carried out by very diverse communities or groups and because the speakers are not homogeneous. However, Halliday distinguishes between language variances based on dialect and register. Example, when talking to persons in everyday life, the speaking style used is more relaxed and tends to be informal. For example, "Hey, how do you do this?" But when talking to lecturer, the style of speech used definitely more formal and orderly. For example, "Sorry sir, how do you solve this problem?" Next, register is a language variation based on the use.
Register is the language used at certain times and is determined by what you do with whom and by what means. The register shows the type of social process that is taking place. Register can sample be said to be language variances based on their use, while dialects are language variations based on their use. In this concept, registers are not limited to word choice, such as the notion of register in traditional theory, but also include the choice of using text structure and texture, cohesion, and testichorrhematic, as well as the choice of phonology or graphology.
Speech communities and communicative competence. A speech community is a group of people who do not always share the same language, but share a set of norms and rules for the use of language. The term communicative competence refers to both the tacit knowledge of language and the ability to use it effectively. It is also called communication competence, and it's the key to social acceptance. The notions of speech community and communicative competence are fundamental to understanding the ways in which social groups organize their linguistic repertoires. Example: in Papua New Guinea, people pay very great attention to small linguistic differences in differentiating themselves from their neighbors. People in one village or clan insist they speak a different language from the next village, although there is often a high degree of mutual intelligibility between them. The so-called Prague School linguists introduced the notions of Sprechbund and Sprachbund. Sprechbund means speech bonds, which involving shared ways of speaking, which go beyond language boundaries. Sprachbund means language bonds, which are relatedness at the level of linguistic forms. So, the term communicative competence is used by sociolinguistics to refer to the speaker's underlying knowledge of grammatical rules. Thus, social language is essential for membership in a speech community.
So, the next point is language, society, and reality. Do different words mean different worlds? So, there is no necessary one-to-one relationship between language and society. As a working premise, however, we can assume there probably aren't any speech communities in which aspects of society have no impact on language whatsoever. Some time ago, one linguist commented that no two languages are sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same social reality. This is an acknowledgement of the crucial role language plays as an agent for the transmission of culture, and it's often said that the vocabulary of a language is an inventory of the items a culture talks about and has categorized in order to make sense of the world. And language is not simply a reflection of some external objective reality which gets cut off in different ways in different languages. And language helps us to make sense of the world. By classifying things, we impose a structure on the social world, and language helps us to construct a model of it. And categorization of the world by language is an ongoing social activity since new things have to be named. Categorization also has a cultural basis, and its items which are characterized as similar in one culture may not be seen as such in another. So that's all from me, and that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for the attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.